And here I am in Ukraine, in the middle of this Russian invasion of Ukraine. Yeah, so, targeted for assassination by, right-wing goons. Not even right-wing goons, because they're not properly right-wing because they don't even have an ideology. They're just crazy people. They are just crazy people, and you have to understand what has happened. And it's going to take some explaining on my part. And so I urge you to be patient and understand that this has a lot of nuance. It is not Putin bad, Zelensky good. No, because life is not like that. You have to be an adult. Okay, so let's get started. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky is born in 1978, and he is an actor, and he's a very successful actor. He is he specializes in comedy. He's a good-looking fella, a hard-working fella. There are videos of him, and people have been mocking him in different platforms, saying that, oh, look, he's dressed up in drag and, in doing a gay dance or whatever. No, that's just a comedy bit. That's kind of silly. He was a professional actor who became a politician. Now, this is perfectly respectable. I mean, Ronald Reagan was a professional actor who became a politician. We don't have a problem with him now, do we? Of course not. The problem is how this happened. You see, Zelensky was an actor, a successful actor, before he was hired in 2015 for a show called Servant of the People. In this show, he played a school teacher who gives a rant on video over the corruption in Ukraine, and this video goes viral. And by circumstances, the comedy circumstances of any television series, he becomes president of Ukraine. And that seems perfectly innocent, right? Right? Well, you start digging in a little bit deeper and you start to realize that this is all kinds of astroturf. Now, for those of you who are foreign, you see, there is an expression in English called a grassroots movement. That is a movement that comes from the bottom and that rises organically, like grass shooting up. But there's a term called astroturf movement, or astroturfed. That means when a movement appears to be organic, that rises up from the people, but in fact it's paid by moneyed interests. And it comes from the fabric called astroturf, which is used in American football, and that's the point. An astroturfed movement is a movement that has been made with money. Now, the person who made Zelensky, the person who is his puppeteer, who pulls the strings on his life, on his existence, his political career, who has appointed all of the members of his cabinet, or has not appointed them, but he has been the one to decide who are the members of Zelensky's cabinet, is a man that you have probably never heard of. His name is Igor Kolomoisky. The man is, at this time, he's 59 years old, and he is a billionaire oligarch, and he lives in Switzerland. In his business dealings, he has used physical violence. He has, on his payroll, militias, goons, thugs, and this is a known fact. This is not me making something up. This is known. He is the man who has bankrolled the so-called Azov Battalion. And this is the bizarre thing. You see, Kolomoisky, Zelensky, and roughly 2/3 of Zelensky's cabinet are Jewish. And so it's just bizarre that Kolomoisky would fund a neo-Nazi group that one would assume would be anti-Semitic. But you see, muscle is muscle. And what Kolomoisky clearly wanted was muscle. He didn't care if they were neo-Nazis. And they are, by the way. And they're avowedly neo-Nazis. They don't go around pussyfooting about it. They're like, yeah, I'm a Nazi. That's what they say. They snatched this mayor of Vladimir Struk, who was the mayor of the city of Kreminna, and they snatched him from his home, and a day or two later, he was found shot through the heart in the very center of Kreminna. They dumped his body in the middle of the city. Now, of course, when you do something like that, when you assassinate a mayor and dump him in the middle of his own city, that's to send a message of, shut the fuck up, don't fuck with us, don't say anything that we don't fucking like. That's the message that's being sent. An advisor for the Interior Minister of Ukraine, Anton Garushenko, alleged that Mr. Struk, quote, was judged by the court of the People's Tribunal and called him a traitor. This is an official of the Interior Ministry of Ukraine who was celebrating the assassination of the mayor of Crimea. That's not normal. This is fucking gangster shit, and not gangster in the cool way. Oh, you look so gangster in those sneakers. No, no, no. This is the gangster fuck you up and crucify you kind of shit kind of way. Yeah, that kind of gangster, which is the Azov battalion has done that, by the way. They have literally crucified people. They have literally tortured people, nailed them to a cross, and hoisted up that cross and videotaped it. Kolomoisky has funded his militias and paramilitary groups and Azov battalion and all this crap. And they are actual neo-Nazis. And when Vladimir Putin said that he was going to invade Ukraine to accomplish two things, the demilitarization of Ukraine, that is, turn it into a neutral state, and the denazification of Ukraine, this is what he meant. Kolomoisky, he started out as an engineer. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union, he made his fortune basically by strong-arming, literally strong-arming, business opponents and other people to amass his fortune, which is in the billions. Now, Kolomoisky, he used thugs, militia, call them what you will, bodyguards, private security, private military contractors, paid muscle, basically. He used it to advance his business interests. He's stolen his money. I mean, it's all stolen. In some cases, he has literally threatened the lives of people who owned companies and stole their companies, threatening their lives and the lives of their family. That's the kind of piece of shit this man is. Igor Kolomoisky. And he ran for president in 2014. He set up his own party, ran for president, and failed. He got something like 2.5% of the vote, of the national vote of Ukraine. And so what did he do after 2014? Very simple. He set up his own scheme to puppeteer somebody into the presidency. And it was a very clever scheme. You see, Kolomoisky owns 1+1 Media, which is a very large media conglomerate in Ukraine. It has television channels and all the rest of it. And so he, or his people, created a show, Servant of the People, as I mentioned before. Servant of the People was a comedy program about a school teacher, as I said, who, in desperation and anger at the corruption in Ukraine, which is endemic and which is caused by men like Kolomoisky, the television show Servant of the People, Kolomoisky, or his company, produced it. They produced it, and of course, Kolomoisky, he astroturfed the show. He made sure that it got all the right media attention, that there was lots of advertisement for it and all the rest of it. And he personally chose Zelensky to be the main character, the presidential character, the school teacher who becomes president. And in the plot of this television show, the president, he wants Ukraine to join the European Union and NATO. Why? Well, because you see, Kolomoisky is a man who hates Russia. He hates it with a passion for long reasons that are too complicated to explain in this video. He hates Russia, and he's made that very, very explicit. He's supported all sorts of moves and laws and movements to curtail the rights of ethnic Russians and Russian language speakers here in Ukraine. Now, Zelensky had no political experience whatsoever and no political interest whatsoever. And what happened next was that over the next 3 to 4 years, the show continued. 3 years. The show continued. It became more and more popular because Kolomoisky put more and more money into the advertisement of the show, trying to astroturf it into popularity. And what happened was that Kolomoisky started building him up as a potential actual candidate. And in 2018, Kolomoisky created the party called Servant of the People, the same name as a TV show. And this party, Servant of the People, its objectives were for Ukraine to join NATO and Ukraine to join the European Union. Now, Zelensky was the president, but the real power was Kolomoisky from his chateau in Switzerland, because that's where he lives, in Switzerland. He does not live in Ukraine. He lives in Switzerland, and from Switzerland, he was the one who appointed Zelensky's cabinet, or again, I'm making the mistake. It's not that he appointed them, but the president officially appoints a member of the cabinet. But Kolomoisky was the man who selected the cabinet. And he selected his friends, and he surrounded the Zelensky regime with thugs, with violent men. Kolomoisky funds Zelensky's campaign. He wins the election, and it was dirty. By the way, it was a dirty election, because Ukraine has been exceptionally corrupt for quite a long time, because there was corruption in the 90s. But what happened was that a lot of Western powers, Western leaders, people like the Biden family, for instance, found out that Ukraine was essentially a piggy bank. They could go to Ukraine, and for some empty promises, they could get a lot of money. I mean, Hunter Biden got a couple of $1 million a year or something, or more, as salary for a no-show job as a director at Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company. Kolomoisky, for the past 8 years, has been funding the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi movements, all kinds of militias, paramilitary groups that are all aligned with the Zelensky regime. Now, the Zelensky regime insisted on joining NATO, insisted on joining the European Union, and this created an existential crisis for the Russians. It's as simple as that. The Russians realized that they could not afford, under any circumstances, to have Ukraine join NATO. For them, it's existential, because they will never allow NATO and its weapon systems to be in Ukraine threatening Russia. And from their point of view, it is, do or die now. But the Americans don't seem to understand this, or their arrogance or hubris, or the other possibility is that they are being manipulated by certain interests. People like Kolomoisky, or people like Victoria Nuland, people like Wendy Sherman, people like Anthony Blinken. Anthony Blinken is the Secretary of State in the United States. That is basically, for those of you who are not American, he is the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Wendy Sherman is one of the principal negotiators. She's an Undersecretary of State, I believe. I forget her exact title, but she's the point person insofar as dealing with the negotiations with the different countries around the world. And Victoria Nuland is a very influential figure who engineered the coup d'etat in 2014 that overthrew the Yanukovych government and installed the Petroshenko government. And she is somebody who is the point person for Eastern Europe. Now, all of these people are with Kolomoisky in the sense that they all agree in the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal is to destroy Russia, because they hate Russia. They have an inchoate, visceral hatred of Russia, and they will do whatever it takes to destroy Russia. I mean, they hate it, okay? I mean, you have to understand that. And you can say that the United States has no such intention. Then why are think tanks talking about regime change in Russia and breaking up Russia into 4 or 5 or even 8, 9 separate countries, balkanize it? Why are these think tanks doing that? Riddle me this, Batman. What's up with that? It's not that Russia one day woke up and decided, hey, it's not like that at all. The Ukraine government, the Zelensky regime, was getting ready to invade the breakaway republics of Lugansk and Donetsk. And how do we know this? Well, because as I'm speaking to you now, the Russians are about to capture between 45,000 and 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers who are positioned in far eastern Ukraine. And they're positioned there, the bulk of the fighters of the Ukrainian army, because they were about to launch an invasion of those 2 breakaway republics. And quite simply, the Russians beat them to the punch. That's basically what happened. The Ukrainians had amassed their army. And remember when the Americans kept saying that, Russia is amassing its troops on the border. Russia is amassing its troops on the border. What does it want to do? Why is it doing that? What's up with what's going on with that? Projection. It's simple as that. They were projecting, see? Because it was the Ukrainians under American guidance. Because don't give me this bullshit that Kolomoisky, who puppeteers Zelensky, and Kolomoisky, more likely than not, was in contact either directly or indirectly with Victoria Nuland, Wendy Sherman, and Anthony Blinken, with the express purpose of creating the conditions of a war between Ukraine and Russia. And they goaded the Ukrainian people into thinking that they could stand up to Russia. Russia has a stronger, bigger, better equipped, better led military than Ukraine. And that's a fact. And that is not belittling the Ukrainian armed forces. It is simply a statement of fact. And so the Ukrainians decided that they were going to goad the Russians, invade these breakaway republics that they were breaking away because the Russians had been fomenting it and financing it. There's no question about that. And I'm not denying that. The Russians were doing this deliberately so that there would always be, something burning in Ukraine, which would prevent automatically Ukraine from joining NATO. Because NATO's rules stipulate that no nation can join it if it is currently involved in either a domestic or foreign crisis, insofar as war or ongoing strife is concerned. And this relentless little grind that was happening in the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, well, that was financed and arranged by the Russians precisely so that it would disqualify Ukraine from ever joining NATO. But why would the Russians need to do this? Well, because they don't want Ukraine to join NATO, because they don't want NATO weapons, NATO potentially nuclear weapons, right on their front yard. In 1962, John Kennedy almost went to nuclear war with the Soviet Union because of the missiles, the nuclear missiles that were parked on Cuba. It's the same goddamn thing, okay? It's exactly the same thing. And so the Russians would not tolerate it. And finally, they realized, look, these Ukrainians, they're goaded by the Americans, they're goaded by NATO and the European Union, and they are going to launch an invasion of Lugansk and Donetsk. So what do we do about it? We beat them to the punch. We go first. We go first, and we'll be the bad guys. Fine, we'll be the bad guys, but see, if we don't do this, we're dead. And they can carry out a first strike and destroy our entire nation. Now, the war started. Bottom line, the Russians are winning. This is one of the most successful invasions in military history. It really is. Okay, successful in the minimization of loss of life, successful in the amount of territory gained in the amount of time that we're discussing. They're winning. They're winning decisively, and their strategy has been very, very simple. They advance, and when they hit any resistance, hard resistance, they surround that resistance, and they wait it out. They wait it out and start turning up the heat. You see, it is clear at this time that Kolomoisky and Zelensky himself have lost control of their own government. And what is clear is that with this invasion, the more sensible people, the more executive people, the more moderate people have been shoved aside as the situation has very clearly deteriorated. What I suspect has happened is that with this invasion and the clear sense that the Ukrainians are losing, and from the very beginning it was clear that the Ukrainians were going to lose, the more sensible, moderate people, the more hard-headed people, the people who would actually go ahead and potentially negotiate a structured surrender of some sort or a cessation of hostilities that would leave the Russians in the driver's seat, well, they were pushed aside. And the people who are now clearly in control of the government are the thugs. And if you don't believe me, look at all the pictures of Zelensky. Like, for instance, when he signed the letter asking to join the European Union, that it was so celebrated, look at the people around him. They were thugs. You can just see them and you realize, they look like club bouncers, now didn't they? Yeah, they were thugs. The Zelensky regime realizes that the game is up, and the fascist neo-Nazis realize that they are dead men. That's what's going on. And so that's why this war is prolonging itself, because the neo-Nazis in the Zelensky regime realize that if they lay down their weapons, they're going to be killed by the Russians. The Russians, unfortunately, have said this. That's the issue. They've said that they know who the Nazis are, and they're going to get them. They're going to get every last one of them. They've said so. And they've said that they have no trouble whatsoever and no problem whatsoever with an honorable, decent member of the Ukrainian armed forces. But to all the neo-Nazis, all the thugs, all the lunatics, the Russians have essentially said, you're dead. And that's why it seems to me, and here we go into my supposition. My supposition from what I have seen so far is that the Ukrainian government, the Zelensky regime, is now controlled by the thugs that Kolomoisky put in there. And frankly, I don't think that Kolomoisky has any control over them anymore, because these thugs realize that the game is up and they are dead men. And so they are no longer paying attention to Kolomoisky, much less Zelensky. Zelensky is their puppet. He's just their skin suit, frankly. They realize that what they have to do is fight to the very last Ukrainian man, woman, and child, because If they get captured by the Russians, they're dead. And so they are going to do everything in their power to avoid that fate. That's what's going on now. And that is why every day, the Ukrainians, or let me phrase it, the Zelensky regime creates a situation that will lead to a foreign policy disaster for the Russians, like yesterday, or the day before yesterday, or yesterday. I'm getting the days mixed up, because, well, they showed up with some RPGs. That's rocket-propelled grenades. And they started firing those rocket-propelled grenades from the Zaporozhye power station, deliberately trying to draw Russian fire against them. Why? To create the nightmare public relations scenario of the Russians setting fire and shooting on a nuclear power station. Immediately when this happened, Zelensky went out with a statement saying that he denounced it, that the Russians were going to explode the power station, and the whole of Europe was going to go up in flames because of the crazy Russians. The crazy Russians did this. And it had nothing to do with the crazy Russians, and it had everything to do with Zelensky provocateurs. That's the truth. And the Zelensky regime has lied consistently about all sorts of stuff. For instance, the ghost of Kiev. The ghost of Kiev, who was this ace pilot who shot down 6 Russian planes on the first day. And then it was like 13 planes in like 2 days. There was no fucking ghost of Kiev. It was made up. Okay? The same story is that, there were 13 defenders on this little island called Snake Island in the Black Sea that was Ukrainian, and that the Russians invaded it and took control of it, really. And the 13 men there said, "Fuck you, Russians, we'll fight to the death." And they all died. And then it turned out that, first of all, there weren't 13, there were 82, which is kind of surprising. I saw a picture of the island. It was really tiny, but okay. 82 soldiers there, and none of them died, okay? There were no 13. That was a lie, okay? All kinds of lies. And what's really interesting is that the Zelensky regime is really, really good at the PR game. And what's the point of their PR game? To draw the West into the war, to create the conditions where Americans and Europeans are willing to commit troops to fighting in Ukraine against the Russians. It's PR manufactured. I mean, Zelensky is an actor. Mm-hmm. And Kolomoisky, he believes in PR and manipulating public perception to get his way. That's how he got a president into office in Ukraine. See? That's what's going on. So anyway, the thugs have taken over. The thugs have definitively taken over the Zelensky regime. Yesterday, he gave a press conference to the European Union. And he was stoned. I mean, he was serious. I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say it was cocaine. Okay? And, Putin had said that he wanted to get rid of the drug addicts in Kiev, in the regime. He said that he called some of them drug addicts. And a lot of people said that was just hyperbole. But the thing is, it's been becoming increasingly clear that Zelensky has a drug problem. I mean, he's a junkie, or he's got a serious coke habit. Mm-hmm. And, probably, bought all that coke with some of his $1 billion. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because that's how much Zelensky is worth at this time, $1 billion. Now, tell me this. How on earth could a Ukrainian actor, star that he is in a successful TV show and successful movies, though he may have been in, how does he have $1 billion? Huh? You tell me, man. I mean, what? What the fuck you think, man? Come on. You're a grown-up. You know what's going on. Corruption, thievery. Was true. And this is not me being a Vladimir Putin apologist, okay? When I first heard him characterize the Ukrainian leadership as drug addicts, I was like, fuck you, man. What the fuck you talking about, dude? But seeing Zelensky, I'm like, dude, the fucker was right, man. Yeah, he is. He's a junkie, okay? He's an actor. I mean, come on, these guys, man, what the fuck you think, huh? Anyway, it seems clear to me, like I said earlier, that the thugs are in control, because whenever you see Zelensky, he's surrounded by thugs, by guys who look like club bouncers, and they look nasty. They were dressed like thugs, they looked like thugs, they acted like thugs. They were thugs. They were thugs outright. And look at the picture. You don't have to believe me. Look at the picture. Look at the picture. Google it. It's the first negotiation meeting between the Russian delegation and the Ukrainian delegation in Belarus. Google that and you'll see the picture. It's very clear. On the left-hand side are all these gentlemen from Russia who are there to negotiate, and on the right-hand side are a bunch of thugs. Yeah? I mean, you'd look at those guys on the right that were representing Ukraine, and they looked like the entourage of some white guy rapper. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what they look like. It seems that under cover of this chaos, this social chaos, this movement of everybody from side to side, well, it seems that people are disappearing and really fucking awful things are happening. These thugs are like rats on a sinking ship and they're getting desperate. And they're lashing out at whoever they can because they know they can't beat the Russians. And they're terrified of the Russians because the Russians have said, you're dead men. And deservedly so. And especially the way that they're acting now. And now that the situation is deteriorating in Ukraine, these thugs are realizing that they're on a sinking ship and they're lashing out. They're broken away from Kolomoisky. This is my belief. And we will only find out when this is all over. They are lashing out. They are going after anyone that they perceive as an enemy, anybody that they can reach, that they can grab. You see, these thugs that are currently running Ukraine, and they probably essentially have Zelensky drugged up all the time so that they can control him easier. And so they can carry out these false flag operations, these attacks, drawing the fire of the Russians in such a way that it will inevitably lead to deaths among the Ukrainian civilian population and the destruction of Ukraine. They are rats pulling down the Ukrainian people, drowning them. And they will destroy Ukraine. What's going on now is that these thugs, they want to prolong this war as long as possible because as long as the war is prolonged, they survive. And the fools in the West who keep cheerleading this war, who keep saying that, keep on fighting, I stand with Ukraine. You are encouraging people to continue fighting in a war that they cannot win. And we have seen what happens when people surrender to the Russians, like what happened in Kherson. The city of Kherson, a major city, a major port, surrendered to the Russians. And what did the Russians do? They let the city of Kherson continue raising the Ukrainian flag. They did not remove the mayor or any of the bureaucrats in the city. They organized humanitarian relief, help for the citizenry. Are the Russians saints? No, they did it for a very practical political reason, because they do not want to alienate the Ukrainian population. That's why they did it. It's not that they're saints, they're simply practical. And so I'm begging you who are listening to me, recognize what's going on. Don't be sucked in by this bullshit narrative. That's all smoke and mirrors. It's all bullshit. It's all lies. And we've seen these lies countless times. The ghost of Kiev, the 13 sailors, all the rest of it. The false flag operation, the provocation at the Zaporozhye power station. All of this leads to the same conclusion. These people will do anything to manipulate the West into joining in this war. And this war cannot be won by the West. They're criminals. And they've got to these positions of power by a series of events, by the ambition of an oligarch who wanted to be president and he got BTFO'd. And so he found a puppet in Zelensky, an attractive, good-looking, charismatic puppet, but a puppet nevertheless. And Kolomoisky is pulling the strings, and all of Ukraine is suffering because of it. And now Kolomoisky has clearly lost control, but he doesn't care. He's in Switzerland with his 3 passports. And you who are my audience, I know that most of you are in the United States, in the West. And so take what I've told you. Don't believe what I said. Look it up. Look it up for yourselves. See if what I'm telling you is true. See if I'm lying to you. Look it up. Make up your own minds and tell other people. If each of you tells just one other person, soon enough, they will tell other people and hopefully wind down this war. Because my terror, too, is at this time that this war, this invasion by Russia of Ukraine, might widen and become a horrible, horrible cataclysm for us.